This program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9
Jump
FM.
into the conversation of the work session tonight. Just a couple of comments or things, just if you would indulge me. First, I want to read something, and this is a test to see if you read your packet, but if you have just some perspective on it. So, this was something from our history as a community and as an organization. And it said, in recent years, public discourse has become more contentious, with dissension coming before honest, orderly debate, gamesmanship valued or overstatement statesmanship, extremism instead of commonality, and might be taken mistake for right. All to the detriment of reaching reasoned long-term solutions for the challenges facing communities, our state, and our nation. It went on to say that words matter, how we treat each other matters, and use of destructive discourse has negative consequences for society by fostering polarization instead of the community, alienation instead of involvement, and contempt rather than understanding. These were words actually adopted by the City Council in 2011, when the City Council adopted a resolution promoting civil discourse. And I think that those are really relevant to the conversation that we're going to have tonight about a code of conduct and ethics and where we want to go with that. The other thing that I just wanted to maybe reflect on a little bit, and again, if you would indulge me, these were some remarks that I made to all of our employees in all-day training that we were having a few years ago. And they had to do with conduct and the relationship of conduct to trust and happiness. And I know those might seem like odd things to try to link together. But if you think about it, everybody they want to be happy. And trust is one of the very three major factors that you have to have in order to be to find a fulfilled or happy life, according to a lot of research. And so the importance of trust, and trust is fundamental. It's having the absence of fear. And if you can't trust, anything, then your life really becomes intolerable. And if you can't trust the relationships, without trust, you can't have good relationships. And frankly, the trust is that glue that holds relationships, together. And those relationships are really important, and we see them in our lives at all levels. Whether that's with our kids or with our spouse, we have to have trust if we're going to have happiness. We have to have trust in our institutions. Just think back to the bank fee issue with Wells Fargo, and what that did to the trust of their customers. We want to have trust with our churches and our youth organizations that we entrust our kids to. And then there needs to be trust with the government. Think of Flint, Michigan, or county treasurer issues, and what happens to the sense of that community if they lose trust with their local government, or perhaps it's a local police department in some communities. So, why do we care about this? There's a researcher by the name of John Hellewick. He's a Canadian economist, and he says that the relationship between trust and happiness are inseparable, and that matters a lot as you talk about citizens, because they have to be able to trust their most basic local form of government. If they're ever going to find happiness, you've got to have it in all these other elements of your life, but it also includes trust with your local government. And it's a two-way flow. You can't feel properly engaged if you don't trust the people you're engaging with on a regular basis, and engagement breeds trust, and trust breeds engagement. So how does all that fit into the conversation that you're about to have? You have in your handbook, your council handbook, a series of things related to protocol and procedure and that sort of thing. But a code of conduct or a code of ethics holds people to a higher standard, and it talks about how we would interact with each other. The employees have a code of conduct, boards and commissions have a code of conduct, and for your consideration tonight is a proposal for a code of conduct or ethics for the council. So when you think about holding, having your conversation and your conduct at a higher level so that it builds trust amongst yourself or with the citizens or with the staff, That's the context in which all this is brought forward. Code of conducts for legislative bodies is not uncommon. It's fairly common among legislative bodies. In coming forward with a model for you tonight, we modeled much of this after Green Bay, and you can see that we included the Green Bay model, in your packet. But we also pulled elements from other entities, and I appreciate Steve and his staff for the work they did in researching different entities and putting together much of what's before you, tonight. So it's a model, and like I said, it's here for consideration. The resolution that was passed in June asked that we have a work session and we bring a model forward, and tonight's an opportunity for you to give me and the staff some feedback on that model so that we can bring back one for your consideration either at the first meeting, or one of the meetings in September. So, and I have to apologize, but so this was the slide that was supposed to be up during the overview marks relating to trust in government and public, and why ethics and conduct matter in developing and maintaining that trust with the public. So in terms of our history, there was a code of conduct that was proposed to the council in 2007. We did include that in the packet of materials that you have. That was not passed at that time by the council. In 2011, the American Bar Association promoting a resolution promoting civic public discourse was passed by the council. I referenced some of the comments that were in that for you in my earlier remarks. And then in October of 2013, a code of conduct was adopted by the City Council for the committees and the committee structure. And that's also been included in the packet of materials that you have. So again, there was a resolution on June 12th requesting that the staff create a code of conduct and bring forth a policy for you to review, and that's what we've done here tonight. This is your opportunity tonight to have that review and comment, and that would be that'd be brought back in for your legislative consideration in August or September. So a couple of things, in terms of a code of conduct, and why have a code of conduct. It basically codifies some ethical conduct and holds people to those higher standards. It does set a policy, and within that policy, you're setting standards, you're reinforcing the legal requirements that you're already obligated to. It defines the ethical standards. It promotes a positive and affirming conduct and culture within the organization. It's hopefully succinct and positive statement of the behaviors and values that provide for and facilitate an effective and functioning government. It hopefully is promoting civility, and it also provides consistency when it comes to training. So to the extent that we're putting training together for the council or for others, you have a foundation for some consistent training from year to year or council to council. There are a bunch of key elements that were considered, and I'm not going to read through them all, but they're there for your consideration. But within almost all of these are in the proposed policy at some level. Some with a little harder punch than others, but these are kind of some of the key elements, and so these are here in the presentation. So to the extent we're having conversation, and you might want more emphasis or less emphasis, you can kind of come back to some of these key elements. In terms of this draft, we liked the Green Bay model because the language was simplistic. It was readable. It wasn't a legalese kind of language. Thou shalt not do this and thou shalt do that. It was more of a narrative and had. What's it?
The Bible and the Old.
So this is the New Testament version.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
But a little more lay language.
Right. So having more lay language with it, and it's a nice way of blending the ethics and the legal together. You'll see that the legal is kind of blended into it, so it's not, here's the legal piece of it, and here's more of the ethic piece of it. So we like that, and Steve did a nice job of maybe adapting some of that, plus some things that we liked from some other policies into what you have before you. So that's a little bit of the overview. I don't know if anybody has anything they want to weigh in on at this point, kind of at that conceptual level, or what we were trying to accomplish. And then what I would do is we would just go through each of the sections and kind of point out what was there. Assuming all of you've read it, but you know, we will point out a little bit in each of the sections, and then turn it over to you to give us some feedback. So, anything at this point before we kind of get into the policy itself? Yes, Andrew.
Yeah, Dale, just about, thanks for the work on this, and I know you put work in as well in 2007 on that proposal. But in terms of who this covers, I just wanted to clarify, because when I reached out in the spring about this, it was really around the interactions between council members, and I think Green Bay's model, it maybe has interactions between staff, public, press as well, if I remember correctly.
So this is broader than simply just within the council, but it is about the council's conduct in interaction with those different groups, basically. So it's not only the council
versus just keeping it between council members.
What was the thought process on that?
Yeah.
So in terms of conduct, so like when we talk about our employees, or we look at the employees' policies, we don't think in terms of only their conduct with fellow employees, but we talk about, you know, the conduct and that we expect, you know, when they're interacting with the public or when they're interacting with the press. And so it is about that expectation of how, at least when we talk about employees, how we're going to interact when we're employees. And this would be, you know, for the council in terms of when you're in that council role, helping define that council role, and then also defining how, you know, we would want to uphold that conduct when we're, you know, working between each other as council members, but also with the public or with the media, and also that relationship with staff, and defining that relationship. So I don't know, Steve, if you want to add to that?
Not much more, other than it does address conduct by council. It doesn't address conduct by the press or by, you know, employed staff. So it is all about city council member conduct, which otherwise is a gap. And so, you know, we have policies on the employees, which council members are not, and we have a policy on committee members, which sometimes, you know, you serve on, but and is arguably applicable while you're serving, but it's a little bit gray. And then you have a very broad policy statement, which, you know, as Dale went through, you know, sort of another attempt at the concept of ethics was that ABA model code. So that's sort of, you know, as we sometimes say in work sessions, you know, that for sure is that 30,000-foot view of a very broadly, we hold to those sort of concepts, which were a little more, you know, forward recognizing of issues than perhaps any of us would like. But so you have those elements, but you don't have, and you have then you have state law, and state law applies to you, and we train on that annually, and so state ethics code. But this seemed to do a nice job of meeting then that conduct issue, bringing in some ethics issues. And then you have just the, you know, you almost always ask us what are other communities doing. So Green Bay has had this issue. It's had it, frankly, for decades. I grew up as, you know, a child of two Green Bay you know, parents and grandparents, and I, you know, grew up talking politics at my grandparents' kitchen table, and Green Bay had these sort of tough issues, you know, back in the 70s and 80s and 90s when I went to college there. And so they've had a lot of this and decided eventually to take some action on it. And I also included just an excerpt of one of the pieces of coverage on it because it was fairly short, but it encapsulated some of the tough issues of pushback on, and, you know, where you all want to draw that policy line. So one, it's one of the more recent ones, and then it has gotten some, I think, you know, kind of good copycat sort of stuff. So Wausau is considered something very similar. We're looking at it. A number of other communities have them. So other communities that you often ask about, you know, like La Crosse and Janesville, and I've drawn some on those. But some of them just struck me as, at least for me, and, you know, Dale made the final call of, they were more legalistic. They were more of, some of them just simply paraphrased or in some cases repeated state law. And I didn't, one, it's not necessary. State law is there whether you choose to re-acknowledge it or not. And I mean, you all have to let us know, but I didn't think that that's what you were really going for. That it seemed like you're calling yourself to some higher level of conduct as opposed to just saying, hey, we know we can't take bribes. That's against the law. You know, we know we can't take
Please
items
don't
of
do
value.
that.
and actually,
We'll say it politely with silly, but please don't take bribes.
exactly. And right. And we also know that it's fantastic that we don't do that, because again, it's also good to travel to know how good we have it. So yes, we're talking about that upper layer of higher level of conduct. And congratulations to you and to us as a city that that's the level we're talking about. Because believe me, I'm sure if you all have gone to National League of Cities or things like that, but if I go, mostly it's at the national level. We haven't had too many issues in statewide politics. We have fairly clean, I think, state, local politics. A little off topic, but you know, when you laugh and say, of course we don't take bribes, that is not
A given everywhere.
a given everywhere in this country, and it is for sure not a given in other countries. So when you talk about the importance of a rule of law and the importance of holding our elected officials at all levels to higher standards, you know, that's not a given everywhere, and we should be thankful for it. So anyway, you all get to decide how high level, but it's a meandering discussion, and we were trying, that was our attempt to try to fit what we thought you were asking for, and you got to give us feedback today on how close we hit the mark.
Any other overview? Yes, Catherine.
I'd like to just first start by saying thank you very much for the work that you all have done on this. I think this is really important and timely consideration for our community. And I would just park a big group question, because I know that we're going to be delving into the details kind of section by section. And the big group question, I'll give a little background on it, is around kind of the tone that we want to set in this document. And I was talking to the city manager about a completely different topic, and he reminded me of our session with our strategic planner in the spring. And Rebecca Ryan talked about Eau Claire is an it city, and you guys are pretty aspirational. And so when I was talking about this idea with the city manager, he respectfully prodded me to say, well, what's Eau Claire's like fingerprints on this? Like, how do we make this aspirational? And so as I read through this, even though I do think that this is very much a high level, you know, conduct of, you know, more than just bribery and all that kind of stuff, I also think about what's our fingerprint on this? Like, how do we make this specific for Eau Claire? And what's the kind of tone that we can set in this document? Because as I read it right now, I feel a little bit like, oh, yep, won't do that, won't do that. Versus, is there a way that we can help set the stage, kind of like the city manager did with his opening remarks about happiness and trust? And so I don't know what those words are, and I don't know exactly what the right tone is, but I would just park that for our group to think about as this document hopefully will eventually be adopted and hopefully be used. When somebody starts on council, is it, like for me, of course, like I'm firstborn and I follow all the rules. yep, we'll do that. But more of like an invitation of like, we do live in a good community, and public service is a good thing, and how do we build upon that? So I'm done.
Can I add just a little bit onto what you were saying? Also, I want to add my thanks to thinking through this. One of the challenges I feel with this kind of thing is just the very language is really challenging, right? How does someone interpret what is appropriate, for instance? But I think one thing that we're all kind of thinking about this maybe in the shadow of is the Me Too movement, which to me I think has been a really profound force in our culture. And one of the things that I would like to see become a part of that movement is larger questions about abuse of power in the workplace in general, because I think that's the wider issue of the Me Too movement, and I think that's an issue for any workers, including elected officials, and it's something that ties in things like gender and race, but just this larger question of how can we be really ambitious regarding what abuse of power means, and how abuse of power and power dynamics play into what we do in city council. That's one way to make our mark, or to be saying that we're engaging with issues here at the city level and trying to work through things that, we don't always even have the language developed to think through, but that are really critical to how do we as human beings address power in an ethical way.
So how does, this addresses maybe a little beyond just in our activities in the council chambers, how are that different and, we're governed right now by Robert's Rules of Order, which is pretty clear and defined on how you're supposed to manage your meetings, our behavior. We have, the body has the right to appeal things right to the chair. The chair has the ability to control the meeting based on Robert's Rules of Orders. So I guess how is this differing, and why is it some of it necessary given that we have those constraints already?
I would offer that Robert's Rules as well as the current handbook is more procedural and process orientated. This takes it up another level to the decorum, the civility, the way in which there's an expectation that people will treat each other and talk to each other, and basically calling the organization to really a high level of civility, and there's a lot built packed into the word civility, in how there's an expectation that the council members would treat each other as well as treat staff, treat the media, and just the way that they would conduct their business amongst themselves and with others.
Can I maybe add on the article that, is it okay if I see it in the meeting? Okay, that Steve had shared with us is just a one-pager, but it talks about in Green Bay, the 11-page code of conduct addresses items that many people likely consider common sense. For example, it says elected officials shouldn't be belligerent, abusive, or threatening. And then there's kind of a whole dialogue that goes on between, well, maybe we don't need the Constitution. I might as well just rip that thing up. And so kind of talks about that pushback, but really kind of outlines and spells out, well, I guess at the heart of it, what do we mean by respect? And going to Robert's Rules talks about a society, and the society gets to make up the rules of how they're going to conduct themselves. So this really dovetails to Robert's Rules, so then Robert's Rules would enforce what the society would set up as a standard.
Any other overview marks or observations before we kind of take a cut into the document itself? So it's organized by several sections, and the first section is really the kind of that introductory. It sets the bar, it sets some standards, and maybe it's captured there when it says uphold, promote, and demand the highest standards of ethics from its elected officials. So. The rest of the document is essentially, putting some more, concepts around that idea of upholding, promoting, and demanding the very highest standards of ethics from yourselves as elected officials. So that's what one is. I don't know if you have a preference. I was thinking more. I would just go through and kind of outline each one. I don't know if you want to stop at each one or just have me go through them and you can kind of circle back to the ones you want to talk about. But that's what I was thinking about doing. Again, this is your discussion, but maybe just make sure everybody has their questions answered in terms of what's before you, and then let you go back and talk about the ones that that might be of interest to you. That work? All right. So that's section 1. Section 2 is the elected official conduct with one another. So that concept of using formal titles, being civil and using decorum in the discussions and the debate, and then honoring the role of the chair, in the responsibility in running the meetings. Section 3 is is the section for how conduct would happen with staff, and it highlights treating all staff as professionals. That we don't want to be calling out or demeaning or having personal attacks on individual employees. Respecting that role and division between the legislative body and the administrative authority, so being careful not to overstep the bounds into the administrative authority, and not soliciting political support from staff. So those are kind of the highlights or the bullet points that are found within Section 3. Section 4 then is about the conduct with the public, and that's broken into 2 sections, one public meetings and then outside meetings. But for the public meetings, that we want to be welcoming and treat with care and respect. We want to be fair and equitable with the time that people are given. We ask for clarification and avoid debating with members of the public, and we're following the parliamentary procedures that are outlined. And then for meetings to the outside, being careful to understand that when speaking as individuals, that you're not promising on behalf of the city or the council, but that you're speaking as an individual, unless you've been authorized to speak on behalf of the council or action that's been taken by the council. Section 5 then talks about conduct of public agencies. It clarifies that or asks that you be careful to clarify when you're representing the city or when you're representing a personal interest. And then also representing the city, it talks a little bit about how to represent the city when you're on outside entities. 6 gets to boards and commissions, recognizing that when you have contact with a board or commission, that the position that you have as a council member carries weight, and being sensitive and careful to that when you're working with a board or commission, and also when you're in attendance there, and then being respectful that there could be diverse or different opinions coming out of that board or commission that are different than perhaps what you have. 7 then looks at the media, contact with the media, and again, expressions of position on issues, and being careful to understand that line between when you're representing a council or a council position that's already been taken versus an individual position, and then discussions regarding staff, that particularly personnel matters or issues related to staff should be deferred to the city manager or the city attorney, and it should be an area to stay out of as a council member for media contact. And then 8 gets into the enforcement, and here we've put this into the document, and I think if you look at that under the enforcement section, there's certainly the implementation, the idea that this is to be self-enforced within the body itself, that it's an ethical and conduct standard shall be intended for the orientation of new council members or newly elected members in the boards and commissions. That one way of enforcing or calling out infractions of the policy would be to use the parliamentary procedures that would occur by raising a point of order within a meeting. And then C and D of the enforcement section, I guess would be something that you'll want to talk about. But do you want to go so far as to have a process or mechanism in place for repeated or serious violations of the conduct, and then what would possible sanctions be? And there's a list of those that we found in some other policies. Informal censure or formal censure, and maybe some attendance at counseling, fines, or removal from office. If that's a direction that you want to go, there should be some further discussion about that. It can be, when you get into censure or actually, taking possible action. It shifts if it's the council doing it amongst themselves, it shifts the council into a quasi-judicial mode, and there's a lot that goes into that we didn't include here. If that's the direction you want to go, we would have to add a lot more to this. Rules of evidence and how evidence is taken and how testimony is taken and credibility and all of that. So I think that it can be very challenging for a board to do that, and then it's also challenging for the board to actually enforce it if they if they do order something there. So we saw a mix of that in other organizations. Most other organizations, there are policies that we looked at didn't have the censure or the actual penalties piece, and it was more of a self-enforcement among the council itself. There are legal challenges with going down the path of the censure. I don't know, Steve, if you want to talk just a little bit about how that works or how it would work with the city attorney's office and some of the challenges that would be there.
Yeah, I think your real policy choice on enforcement is whether you want to go beyond B. And notice last time, at least council formally considered this, in the 07 model, it really followed the A and B concept that it's, as indicated earlier, it's aspirational, it's self-enforcing, acknowledging, some of the versions we saw. I can't remember if we came forward with that in 07 or not, but certainly other current models, have self-acknowledging letters like we reference in this proposed 8A. And again, points of order are certainly very appropriate. Earlier reference by Dave about Robert's rules, and so that's a good way to handle it in meeting anyway. So really the trick becomes outside of a meeting, and even if sort of called upon and someone's reminded of, council members reminded that they signed a self-enforcing document and it doesn't self-correct, what, if anything, do you want to do about that other than calling it to their attention, potentially calling it to the attention in public, and having some sort of non-binding public reprimand, which is still somewhat an issue, but at least doesn't fully, I think, invoke, if there's no other penalty than that, sort of full due process rights. But if you go beyond that, if you're in a fining situation, or certainly if you're in a removal from office setting, you're going to have full due process rights. That's fair and impartial hearing, right to be confronted by witness, right to representation, and so it's something similar to say taking a liquor license. So we do that very rarely. We've done it once in my tenure with one establishment. It's very intensive process. So the entities, the communities that have chosen to do that usually then establish a board of ethics, just like we've established an administrative review board, because that sort of a due process hearing is very cumbersome to have at a full council level. So there's a smaller group that does it. But again, I didn't want to draft 3 pages of, now you're going to create another board and staff it in a very unlikely, hopefully very unlikely instance that you ever have that sort of enforcement mechanism. But that's what I'd recommend if you really try to do it, is to have a separate committee and don't try to hold that whole hearing in front of probably 10 of you, since one would almost by definition be the defendant, or kind of the respondent in that sort of a situation. The other challenge you have legally is I represent the city of Eau Claire as a corporate entity. I represent all of you collectively in your corporate responsibility to give direction to the corporate legal entity of the city of Eau Claire. I don't represent any of you individually. So you all know that, but so that means I could not represent any of you individually as a respondent. It also puts me in my office in a horribly conflicted situation to prosecute that, or to represent what would in essence be the other 10 of you then standing as jurors, as decision makers in that. So I would have to recommend, if you set something up like that, that if it would ever be invoked, you would likely need to retain legal counsel to prosecute it, if you need assistance in moving forward with the claim, and then counsel to represent the legal counsel, an attorney to represent the city council in its role to decide the case, because we're conflicted on all fronts on that one. So it really it would be hard for our office in-house to take any of those roles. So it would be expensive for you to go forward with it. And then while removal from office certainly is an option, it actually was just written about in the most recent Municipality magazine by Claire Silverman, the League's counsel, in one of her regular monthly columns. So it clearly is a statutory option, but at least in my legal opinion, the concept for that is around dereliction of duty. So it would, failure to attend meetings anymore. Someone leaves town, someone just shows no interest, fails to show up for meetings, but doesn't do the service to the community and sort of to self of resigning. You'd hope that never happens. It's never happened to us, but it could. Or a kind of other undefined gross misconduct. It doesn't parallel the language on the federal level of high crimes and misdemeanors, but it would be something like that, likely a disqualification, say, to run for office itself, a felony conviction. Or another one would be, leaving the community, setting up a residence outside the community, which would prevent you from running for re-election or election in the first instance, but you're denying it, but everybody knows that they now live in Menominee or something like that. There's some of those incidents, but they're so rare. They've never happened here, that, to my knowledge. I've heard of them happening in other communities, but those would be potential reasons to remove. Even a fine would be very contentious, and even at least non-voluntary things like mediation or anything that the council member wouldn't accept would be challenging and would invoke all these sort of legal procedural issues. So. That's the type of stuff that Dale had talked about, that if you really want to go down the roads for sure, anything beyond a sort of a public reprimand that's not binding, you would have to work into the ordinance.
If we would need some direction, because there'd be a lot more work that would go into that piece if that's where you want to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Board of Ethics option, that would also be, because I do like the Board of Ethics, but would that also require the legal, upon legal, what you just described, or is that, could we have a Board of Ethics and not have this expensive legal team? And
the role of the Board of Ethics would in essence be to rule upon those sort of infractions, which would invoke all those legal costs and expenses.
Okay, so they are.
So all those challenges are there, whether it's to the full council or whether it's to a smaller Board of Ethics. All those procedural issues and challenges, including even the enforcement or whatever the things are there.
Yeah. And you couldn't have a Board of Ethics and not have them, just hey,
Yeah, there's always a recipient of the hay.
Right.
Who might not agree with the hay.
Right,
so
but
they
still,
would have a right to
But if their
respond.
community members or peers all said, hey, it says something.
Yeah.
Hey, knock it off.
Right, if you have to go before the Board of Ethics, yeah. And you could
And
refuse.
you can do it, you can set them up, but the Board of Ethics would need its own legal
Right.
counsel to help it and advise
it would need
and
its own.
And
Because it would need its own advice
It would
on
move
how to
forward.
act or how to respond to something, or
Okay.
particularly the procedural issues. There are time limits that have to be put in on when people could, submit their charges versus when somebody can put their response in. And, all that stuff has to be defined.
So.
otherwise the mechanism is utilized on violations of state ethics. So otherwise what we do, which you're familiar with, is if you have ethical questions, you come to me. It's the one area that, again, I train on to say I can have confidentiality with any of you individually. I advise you on ethical decisions. It's then up to you to make those choices on your own of whether you follow it or not. And if you don't, should there be a violation, it's not an ethics board that prosecutes it, it's the district attorney. So that's the state model. It does provide for the potential to create a local ethics board, but otherwise that's the model, and that's that differentiation of office that's already built in, because then the independent review is the elected district attorney who says, okay, if it's bad enough, if they've done all these things, you know, they can move forward with any number of charges. And potentially, I mean, they're not going to enforce a code of conduct, but that could be instructive of whether there's misconduct in office. But, you know, likely those charges from a DA aren't going to come forth. Likely, not my call. But unless there's things that are bribery or other forms of statutory misconduct in office, you know, some type of serious dereliction of duty.
What's that?
I think Chippewa just had one.
Oh, yeah, with that county supervisor, the highway.
Yeah.
Right, so
Misappropriation of
that's an
funds and
example, right?
resources.
He was using county equipment for personal use.
Yeah.
And the DA charged him for that.
So
Allegedly, thank you.
the legal process is, would be necessary for both all of the censure, penalties, and sanctions for all three of those?
For these two, yeah.
Anything that wouldn't be accepted voluntarily. So you could say that there are potentially means of resolution of some of these issues, but if there's going to be a mechanism of imposing something on another that is a penalty.
So what are your thoughts then about the Green Bay complaint process? Is that what we're talking about? Like that kind of model?
Right, it's very, so you'll notice that none of that's in there, but it's 3 pages of very formal complaint process.
That's the kind of thing, that's the direction you want to go, we would have to develop.
One, I was just sort of going, pontificating as, attorneys are like to do. But when I was giving you some of the background of Green Bay, partially it was to understand where they've been, the road that they've traveled for decades. And so maybe some communities want that and need that, and maybe you feel you want and need that. But they've traveled, in my estimation, a very different, mid to long-term path than what Eau Claire has. But ultimately, you've got to decide that if you want. But you could always add that if you start, unfortunately, traveling down more of that path. And it's not self-correcting, but your call. You just have to know that there's a lot of procedure and time and effort and cost that's involved in it. But you can do it.
I kind of get stuck in that would not be voluntarily accepted, because when you have all of these things written out, those voluntarily accepted may not even be used, because your thinking goes to, it has to be charged. You have to charge them with something. But what if it is just play better in the sandbox kinds of things, and you would think that the person would accept it if confronted appropriately? I don't really see that outlined here, like mediation or something that would be constructive and not penalizing.
I guess I would direct you back to A.
Okay.
So if you choose to do something like that, it would indicate the code of conduct to be self-enforcing, et cetera. Actually going so far as to sign an acknowledging document is quite a bit different than what you now do. Your requirements are otherwise fairly limited. You fill out some paperwork and you hopefully take seriously your oath of office, but you swear an oath of office, and then it's up to you to carry it out as largely as you see fit.
Well, sure, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but again, in your self-behavior, maybe something I'm saying is offensive to someone of gender or color that I'm completely unaware of. how do, you know, where's the confrontation that I have an opportunity to accept? I would think that what you're describing, there's the
No, it doesn't, you can't. There you go.
It's not a tape. You don't have the right pen.
in between B and C, like a point of order would be when is in the meeting, and then if it was a behavior that was continuous, and maybe a couple of council people said, boy, I'm really, that's starting to affect my participation, then there would be not censure necessarily, but some kind of other notification or notice or whatever. So
There could be. You could work something in there. I think you could also, you could add potentially to A, to the concept of
Okay.
self-enforcing. You could probably expand the acknowledgement letter and what you recognize are some of the potential self-enforcing mechanisms. So you could have an acknowledgement that you accept that others might receive it differently than you intended to, and you're acknowledging that you're open to a discussion about that, either with the other council member or, if not satisfactory, to considering some sort of third-party assistance or something like that. And so you could potentially work that in up front. But what I'm saying is that would all have to be something that's sort of self-acknowledged, in essence voluntary,
Right.
as opposed to, oh, but now you didn't do that.
right,
And so
right.
now we're going to order you to mediation.
Right.
Or you didn't do that, so now we're going to issue you a $200 fine plus costs.
Right.
Or
Yeah, no,
remove you from
I just want the
office.
soft
Those
side
are-
of that. I'm
Yep.
just thinking that might
Yeah.
delineate that you can't use your finger and.
Yeah, exactly. Certainly middle.
So I do have more questions, but I think I'm ready to give some direct feedback.
Okay.
And I have a lot of thoughts. And I'm
Right,
actually,
so we can go to any section now, I mean, or.
so I have some thoughts about the enforcement.
Okay.
I'm actually finding this discussion a little difficult, so like bear with me
Yep.
as I muddle through. I think that as far as I see it, the first two model closely to what we have. And I think that while, you know, on the federal level, the level of bullying and of abuse is like incomprehensible. That's kind of a standard that I wouldn't want to put ourselves to or compare ourselves to. And while I think that we're setting a better standard than that, this body does have, frankly, a history of bullying and abuse. And these two enforcement strategies have not worked. And so I'm not necessarily interested in like a full legal process, but if we're gonna go through this, I would be disappointed to see only the first two bullet points. That being said, I think that regardless, this document does set out a standard for how local elected officials should be acting. Even despite this like issue of enforcement, I think that being elected for the first time is, you kind of have to like stumble through learning how to be an elected official and how to act, because it is a little bit different than just being a regular person. And so I do appreciate all that has been laid out, and I think that is really helpful, especially for new council members, and how to act with the different kind of categories of people. But I guess that's my concerns and feedback for enforcement.
Okay. David?
Hey, if anybody's interested. I have a different take on a lot of this. I think it's okay, a lot of this, if we want to put common sense on paper, which to me, a lot of this is just plain common sense and the way we should behave. And I think the way that over the last 6 years in the council, I think most of it's gone. Have there been incidences? Yes, there has. But for me, if we get down to 8, C and D, that's where you lose me. Totally, I think, we're all elected by the citizens of Eau Claire. And I think if they want to recall us, they can recall us. I think if My fellow council members don't like the way I ask a question, the tone I use. The fact that I might not say people first, and then they want to censure me, or fine me, or kick me off the council. I don't think that's right. And I don't think we want to go there. I don't think it's necessary to go there. And I think that some of the things that people are upset about now probably didn't necessarily even occur in public, but maybe were heard by others or something. So I'm not sure even how that would affect these last couple items, but I really feel like we're elected by the public, so, you know, something that's going to offend Jill is not going to offend me. I mean, this group hasn't had any hard conversations, but over the confluence, we called each other out a lot. I mean, I remember Councilmember Duex, Klinkhammer, some of them going at it pretty hard with each other. And, you know, that might offend some people. And then what? Then you get into these items here. I think if it does while it's happening, you call a point of order, a point of personal privilege. But the chair can rule on it, or you can put it to the body. And then, you know, if 6 members of the body rule on it, then there you have your answer. Then it needs to stop or change. But I really feel like if you start going down C and D, I do feel like you're going to get into the weeds a little bit. And I don't know that it's necessary for this body to do that. Having a policy is one thing, but having 2 or 3 people be able to take you to a board and censure you and send you to counseling and that, I mean, I don't know. I reached out to other council members, not any of the 4 that were defeated here recently, but past council members, and to a person, none of them thought it was necessary for us to go to the level of C and D on that, so, for what it's worth.
Past council?
Past council members, but not the ones that were just recently defeated.
Is there, I'm having a hard time understanding why there's no more like middle ground, like why there's a point of order and then like the next step is like full on legal process. And so I guess I have to agree with Dave, and while I think that like a point of order doesn't go far enough, I don't know that like a sanction is something that I would be on board with either.
Well, let me try the non-legal, and then Steve can jump in. But I think that that line is one of when you are now taking something from somebody, like a fine, right? Or they have a right to due process, and as soon as you open that up, there's a lot that goes into providing due process in terms of knowing what the charge is, being able to respond to it, being able to defend it. All those things go into that. And so that line, as soon as you cross that line into essentially the censure or those other sanctions, the person that's being accused has rights. They have rights to them at that point, and you have to have a process that helps protect their rights as well as follow through with it. So I don't know, Steve, add to that?
Yeah, it's really compelling something. So when you write it down and say, again, any of those things, I mean, you're not going to censure, you're not going to talk about mediation, you're not going to fine or remove someone from office if the other council member is willing to do it. But if they're not, and say, no, thank you, I respectfully disagree, hopefully they say respectfully disagree, but basically bottom line is they disagree, you can't compel someone else to do something without due process. And then that involves all those things. Now, we find plenty of things worth the effort to do due process. We're sitting in a courthouse. We're here because as a country, again, I won't go too far off that, but several hundred years now, we have felt that it's important to use due process. But, right? So rule of law matters, process matters, we've heard those sort of things, but when we're on the it makes sense to us side of things, we tend not to notice the process for those that are being imposed against it, right? So that's what you're protecting there. So I think there is more that we could do to build up
voluntary side?
the voluntary
that's
side of
what
it,
I'm
but
thinking.
that is very clearly the split.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I would respectfully point out a little bit is we do not have A and B. That is not, in my opinion, where we're at. This is not adopted. So having this on the books, even if you might think it's common sense, you do not have a council policy statement like this
I
that
guess
applies
what I
to
mean
you.
is when there has been bullying has occurred on this board, and points of order have been made. And frankly, there was a voluntary option to stop bullying, and that request was made over and over again, and nothing, and it didn't work.
Right.
And so I guess that's like the line that I'm trying to figure out how we can correct, or how we can enforce a non-bullying process, or enforce a non-bullying policy without having to hire a bunch of lawyers.
What did you consider bullying?
I think
And did you take it to the body?
We
and
can-
did the
Well,
body-
Yeah.
I
I guess with keeping it, if we could, at a broader level, but I hear that, I really do, but my point is, not always, but a lot of times, simply having a document that you've collectively approved, that calls you to higher conduct, that has a preamble that is aspirational, that has specific points that say this is the conduct we expect. Those things help then to address something that somebody hears and receives as bullying and say, see, we all signed on to this, and you signed on to it when you were elected. And you may not have intended it that way, but I'm hearing it that way, I'm feeling it that way. And it gives you something to point to that has been collectively adopted. Because right now you don't have that as a council, you don't have that collective document to use as a tool.
Violating our code of conduct.
So
Right,
that's
so
my
we
point.
couldn't have said that, right now,
Right.
you can't say that. You
Right.
can't go to a fellow council member and say, the way I see it, what you just did was violating our code of conduct. And I think that could help alter behavior. But ultimately, it has to be self-recognized. So an acknowledgement of, I signed on to this, usually helps somebody self-recognize that, but it doesn't require it. And as soon as you flip over to requiring, that's what lights up, everything else. But you might want to try the additional steps of, adopting that collective statement, and hopefully, I think it will. I think in the vast majority of cases, it will call people to that higher conduct.
And if I could just build, so the point of order, currently, if you're calling a point of order, you're calling a point of order personally, basically. If you have this policy, you're calling the point of order on this policy. And, what wasn't here is, and if you do adopt this or something similar to it, and Steve has referenced it, but I want to be very clear, we would also be proposing that each council member is signing a document that they understand and have received this. So that point of order is calling to task very specific language that doesn't exist now, and also calling to the fact that council member has actually signed that they agree with and understand and accept and are to abide by that set of standards. So that point of order has more weight than it would right now at a council meeting where you're just calling a point of order, because
On a procedural issue.
I think from the perspective that you're describing and deepening, in all of these conversations, it has always been true and affecting these issues that we are elected officials, and that you're elected by some standard of your voter. But this takes our personal behavior out of that. I'm acting on behalf of constituents, and no, I'm acting as part of a body. And it holds me accountable to not just my constituents, but also to something personal and professional. And I think that's an important, this would accomplish something that would be very important, I think, in separating or supporting me when I come back to a constituent and say, that may be what you want me to do, but I'm not able to do
So
that.
Kate, to your point, it doesn't compel. I mean, A and B does more than what you currently can do, but it doesn't compel someone to have to do something. Yes, Kathy?
Can I maybe offer a third way?
Sure.
And I really just want to say I really admire your bravery. Thank you. So thank you. This is hard to talk about. So part of me feels like, well, I think that there are mechanisms that we could put forth, like could still do a board of ethics, and if could ask somebody to do things. Bottom line is, in human behavior, if someone is, and I'm just talking about general people, okay, if someone's behavior is so beastly, it really doesn't matter what you do. They're just going to continue doing that. So I think at that point, the public could recall them. They could choose to do that. I mean, if we have exhausted every non-sanctioned mechanism, that would still all be public. It's not a secret anymore, and the public could choose to do something about that and say, we don't want to have that person representing us anymore. Or the body there might even be some other procedures, Robert's rules of, I don't know, like if a person is a chair, like that person may not be the chair for that meeting, or there's other things that you can do to utilize Robert's rules. But here's where I think, like, I don't know the answer to this, and we might need some more time to work on this whole thing, which would be a good thing, right, Dale?
It's fine with me.
Yep.
As long, I mean, I'm trying to work within the timeline you asked for, but if you want to give me more time, that's fine.
I think we should really be open to that.
Yes.
And I think about, what about restorative justice? Like, could that even be a thing in here, like, even before, or so maybe before B? So, I mean, we can resequence these, but, so there's implementation, and then there's, like, I don't recall something in here that's like, try to talk it out first. I mean, that's pretty basic, but, then you know that you have followed, like, I've signed the document, okay, now somebody's talking to me because what I said was offensive to them, and so we got to talk it out. And then that still didn't work because I got a thick head. So then what? So then you could do, if it was during a meeting, that you could do be during a point of order. But if it kind of gets to this stuff on the censure, like maybe you let the person who's, I don't know, the offender, have a choice of, well, I'm ready to take action to censure you, but I would really just rather restore both of us, or whoever the party is, as a whole person. Could we take some type of restorative justice approach, which really puts it back to like feeling safe and trusting and maybe happy again? And I don't know how you accomplish that just yet, but I'm certain that we can borrow elements of restorative justice, and we already do that in our community. And I think that's a really aspirational and good thing.
In 2B here, it talks if a council member is personally offended by the remark of another council member, the offended member should make a note of the actual words used and call for a point of personal privilege. That challenges the other council member to justify or to apologize for the language used. So that's
only in a formal setting. That doesn't happen when you're talking about, which is another element that we could further define of what happens when you're talking about business that's related to your public official role. And this stuff happens, but it's not in a formal setting.
How's that possible?
like so.
See someone like yells at the press, or something happens at the outside of the
Or an
meeting.
email.
How do you do it? What do you do? Or an email, yeah.
Or a meeting that's not a formal legislative session, like a training.
So then you're not acting as a council member at that point?
Sure you are. All of
Always
it's
acting as council member.
If it's a social event or something not.
Your role could be as council member, but it's not at the council table. I mean, like in a committee meeting or with the press, I think would be very possible.
A phone call, a parking lot conversation.
I'd like to see us move forward with beefing up A and B, but trying. Again, I trust the voters. I trust the voters are going to elect the right people to be on our council. People that are going to be respectful, that are going to be conscious of the community and the people they work with. I do, I trust that, and I trust the people that I'm on this council with now to be respectful. And I like the idea of holding each other accountable. We've signed this, we've all agreed to it. We all understand it, can refer to it if anyone steps out of line, either in public or in a meeting. I think it opens the door for us to at least have that conversation and opportunity to point it out, where maybe we didn't have that before. But I hate to spend so much time creating all these ethic committees and legal teams and time and effort on what might happen or what could happen when I say let's try it and see and put faith in the community and the people that are elected and see where it goes. And I know that sounds wishy-washy and trusting, but I just don't want to see us spend hours and hours and revisit this and over and over for the next year. And I respect the idea, the comment earlier about we want to put our stamp on this, but I don't think it's the paper, the words on the paper that put a stamp on our city. It's the people that govern it. It's us, the decisions we make, things that we do. That's what's going to be remembered. And that's what people are going to talk about. Not because we worded a sentence so perfectly that people are going to stand up across the country and say, "Wow, what a great paragraph." I want them to say that about what a great city. What a great group of people that helped make this a great city.
Well,
my 2 cents.
I'd like to piggyback on that. That's kind of where I liked the idea that you defined what's personally accepted. I mean, because at that point, you're really building relationships, and I think that's the part that changes whatever is going on, is being willing to be in relationship and saying, yes, I'll take responsibility or whatever. But I think the inspirational or motivational part is that we are calling ourselves to a higher standard as representatives of a really wonderful city. Because I think that there are great candidates. I think there's also a lot of times where people run and they're not opposed. And you get that person, whether they're the best or not the best or whatever. So I think to say that this is something that the city council is calling a level of accountability that we're calling our peers to. That might be aspirational, I don't know. But up until now, I don't know that the community ever said, whoa, that's the vision that we have for our council representatives, not just the person that's willing to get 30 signatures.
It's also nice to think about holding ourselves to a standard that we hope to see in our community too, right? So we're setting a standard for ourselves, but also everybody, setting a standard of respect.
If I could just say a few things on this enforcement piece too. I'm sensitive to what Catherine had said earlier about and what Kay had said about things not changing and there was historically a request for change of conduct that wasn't needed, and so there's a part of me that thinks that if there's any way, I don't know if we have in this document or if we say we leave ourselves out in case something comes up and we find that there is a need for us to go down a more serious road. I think I agree with the analysis that yeah, if someone's not voluntarily willing to accept one of these sanctions, then that's a really serious thing. We would probably want to have that done in the right way, in the right process. I think there's a possibility that maybe we could look at, this maybe like an informal censure, or we could think of that as the body finding that someone has violated this code of conduct. And so that would obviously be in a public setting. But so, for example, if someone, outside of a council meeting ends up drunk driving keeps coming to mind, because I called the police two times this weekend on drunk driving, people who almost crashed on Barstow. But like, you know, someone gets into 3 or 4 drunk driving incidents in their council member, and I'm like, well, you gotta hold yourselves to a higher standard. They end up going to jail. That's happened in our history in the last decade. You know, so you know, maybe we want to leave ourselves a possibility as a body in a more public forum to say, like, you violated this code, and we're not taking anything of monetary value. I guess that person may disagree that they've done it, but maybe there's a way in a public forum that we could have a vote like that, and not have it go through this whole committee process and include lawyers, etc. So, I mean, to say it comes up rarely is, you know, maybe, but we've had it happen. We've had things happen. So I want to make sure we have something in between this, which I think is good, implementation, points of order, and the really serious. That'd be my suggestion.
So do the legal structures have to be implemented upon, like if we were to pass a code of conduct with all of the more official channels of enforcement, would that have to be set up upon passage of the code of conduct, or once the council makes the decision to like go forward with a censure or a penalty process?
I think you want it all in place in advance. It does not get more easy to establish procedure once there's a tough issue.
So that's the other thing. We think about, okay, potentially setting up a legal fund. Like, is it possible? Which, I mean, I just think like, oh, okay, so what, you spend $10,000 on legal fees and somebody could just keep fighting you and fighting you, like, at that point. Anyway, hopefully this avoids any of that behavior, but is it possible for council to even put together perhaps a non-lapsing fund, or if we had some, instead of contributing to fund balance, establish those funds into a non-lapsing fund account, or is it possible to set up a council legal contingency fund that?
So my suggestion there is that the funding of the legal bills is not so much the issue, it's just that when you get there, you have to come up with it. So, I mean, it would be so rare, I mean, I wouldn't recommend that you're, you know, setting something aside for that. I mean, when and if that situation came up, I'll give you a very good example of that. I mean, police and fire commissions have to do this, right? When a police officer is charged and you go through all that. We don't have, you know, a special fund waiting for, you know, charges before the police and fire commission. And when they happen, you know, we've had 2 charges in the 30 years that, you know, that I can remember, 29 years that I can remember. You know, you deal with that, you know, exceptional situation when it comes up. So I would encourage you perhaps not to talk about how you would do the funding mechanism. It's just recognizing that if you do go down that path, there will be funds that will have to be expended at that particular point in time. Jeremy?
I was thinking, I may be thinking a little too broadly here, so I need to find where some of the limits are, maybe. So I think about the public role in, like, the role of the public, or say a member of the media. You know, what if they have a grievance or complaint that they want to interject into the mix? I realize that this document is about each other on the council, but it just comes to mind, like, what is the role? What could the role of the public be in expressing, you know, experiences or maybe opinions or whatever it is, you know? Because I can see that being something we'd want to be prepared for, if nothing else. And also, just like, could there be like some sort of formal way for the public to be involved in an important, like, code of conduct issue? Because I think that, I mean, most of the things that I I guess not everything that we could be considering a code of conduct issue could have anything to do with the public, but we're already starting to mention the public in here and mention we're mentioning commissions. Does a commission have a role to play in that? So that's just my broad question, and maybe it's thinking about this too broadly, but.
You know, I mean, there's no bad comments or thoughts, but I mean, I think you have to also be aware of the very real countervailing issues of, you know, so wherever you see self-enforcement, they're decided by the elected officials, so, you know, if you start opening it up more broadly than that, I mean, you could very easily tie up any or all of your lives with any few people that disagree with you. So, I mean, again, at risk of going too broad, but there were a group of people that thought about this a few hundred years ago. And they came up with a process that only set the bar very high, and it was only self-enforcing, and it took 2 different chambers to figure it out. And there's a process there, but it's to be used rarely and only in the most extreme circumstances. So you'll have to figure out what works for you, but I would suggest if you're talking about citizens, their feedback is at the ballot box, through the Fourth Estate, through the use of press and the public free speech, to express their concerns and differing opinions. It's not to act to somehow censure or enforce rules that you make for yourself.
Well,
I guess I was just thinking of like, how do we know if the public if some member of the public actually felt as if the conduct towards them was not appropriate? How do they,
Express that?
Yeah, what is the best way to express that, and how do we be prepared to find an avenue for the public to express that? That is maybe the best way we can think of doing it.
Could we modify, so we have those blue comment sheets, or no, maybe even our council packet, our agendas say all items have to be properly noticed. If you have something that's not on here, talk to the city manager or city council member. Could we modify a sentence like that we could use and also like put in the handbook of, you know, if there's any citizens or members of the public that wish to communicate, please contact one of your representatives. Because then it's on us, like ultimately, even if it wasn't predicated by a citizen, it's still on us to offer some type of enforcement. So it seems like, hopefully if that were to occur, at least one council member would be trusted to say, I hear you, let me look at addressing that.
So like if someone says something racist in a meeting and a constituent said, hey, I was really offended by that, can you address that? And then I would take that constituent concern and be like, hey, I heard from the constituent that this remark they considered very racist. And
so how would that play out, like with those first 2 points outside of like a point of order, like after the fact?
Maybe we gotta like.
This is a can of worms, guys.
If we have a draft, then maybe we work through just different scenarios, you know, of, okay, let's say this happens, but,
There's 50% of the people not gonna like what you say, and the other 50% might.
Well, I think Steve got some perspective on the comments.
Well, ideally, because the example was that it was said at some sort of meeting, so it does get harder once you say it's after the fact, but otherwise, if it's not after the fact, you would have, you know, B as a means to enforce it. So you now have something that would be in place, and so this, you know, for this document to apply, it's a council member, and so now there is a standard of expectation there, and if it happens at a council meeting, the best way to deal with that is to raise it immediately. You know, if we had this adopted, you could do the same training that we do periodically with board chairs, commission, chairs, and say, okay, this is the standard. We all certainly hope it doesn't apply, but in the past, we did have a code of conduct for our council members, but this is it. And so if somebody has a concern, then have the conduct out at a board or commission level, they could raise it at that same time. If it's after the fact, then it goes back to A of some sort of discussion of, hey, remember we all signed this, we've all agreed to it, and that's where it would end. What I've heard from at least Council President Worthman, or Council President Worthman, is that could there potentially be a non-binding, sort of basically the first step of an informal censure. There could, I think that's probably about as far as you can go without, because there's no penalty there, so there's no arguably due process, but you could still have a hearing and you could still use the portions of C to bring it forward. Still murky. I don't hear necessarily broad consensus around that, but for sure that's as far as you can go. Anything further than that you're compelling anyone to do, then you're ringing the due process bell, and we definitely want to ring that bell. It's an important core element of our civil liberties.
So maybe what's between the B and the C is what you just said, the non-binding, binding, unofficial censor, that it all has to be voluntary. Right?
Yeah, it can't have any, penalties or negative,
Right.
so
But like,
there's some implication even there where it's a bit of a gray zone, but that is for sure as far as you could push it, but otherwise, in terms of how you would deal with that, you would hopefully call out the behavior when it's happening, or call out the behavior and point out that it's contrary to the code of conduct, which is intended to be self-enforcing, so self-correct.
and would there be an option to do it in a non-public? Sometimes it's hard, like let's say it's a male saying something sexist, and as a female, because there's kind of that power differential, or if there's a new someone.
We've had this too. We had this happen in our city manager search. Council member made a comment about city manager's wife in a public meeting. And this has happened.
Yeah, so it might be uncomfortable, yeah, to put in order someone in that moment. It's like, oh man, but there'd be an option to do it, not in that moment too. We can make that option.
Well, hopefully, if everybody has signed this, the most vulnerable person would not have to be the person that is going to bring it as a point of order.
Hopefully.
Building up on what you were saying, Jill, I feel like one thing that could be part of the conversation is, I think we're heading towards, these A and B, the non-legalistic things. One thing that you could imagine that the person who feels that they're a victim in the situation might be seeking is some kind of a support structure or a procedure in place that they feel like, okay, I know what to do. In employment situations, right, there's like a employee wellness person that you can talk to, that kind of thing. So, and that might be a thing that, is a voluntary thing for the person that would probably actually use it, that could kind of add on to this, if we're not gonna go that other route.
Okay. Other thoughts? So we got, coming up on an hour and a half here, a little bit. But what I think I'm hearing so far is, maybe it's just something I grabbed, but maybe we can be a little more aspirational in some of the stuff up front, in the preamble, and just use a little bit of language there. And then in terms of the enforcement, beef up A and B as much as we can to come up to that line, but not cross that line. It would require essentially a quasi-jurisdictional process. Judicial. Quasi-judicial mode of acting.
And I like the idea once it's all agreed upon by everybody that everybody signs on to it.
No, that's why I wanted to be clear, because that, we didn't put as, what the signature page would look like on here, but that's very much part of, what we're thinking.
And if I don't like it, I'm not to sign it.
Well, that actually becomes an interesting question.
That's right.
Well, that's
Voluntary
public
as
knowledge
well.
that Dave Strobel will not sign the code of conduct.
My opponent won't sign.
There you go.
So,
But that's true,
add
you
to-
cannot compel, I mean, that's a very good point, you cannot compel, right?
Prerequisite to taking the oath of office, just the oath
But
of
then,
office.
then you won't be seated, you'll have to stand.
Yeah, there you go. In a farmer problem.
Are there, so first
I've been
off,
sitting too long today. I'd like to stand.
is there some consensus, or, I mean, is that a fair?
I guess I'd like
capture?
to kind of tack on another mark of support to what Jeremy was saying. It wasn't clear to me how, if, like, for example, a member of the press or any community member really felt that a council member was violating the code of conduct, how that would bridge to an implementation or some sort of enforcement.
Or simply awareness of that,
Yeah,
that concern exists.
Yeah.
Have some opportunity to accept or not accept it.
I don't have any initial thought, do you have anything that, through that a little bit?
Well, it has to go, it's the filtering, winnowing process you need to do as elected officials. It's the very nature of a representative democracy. So they have to get it back to you. So, I mean, the discussion did bounce around to that, and, yeah, they get back to a council member. There could be things that we could write in here that would make it clear that that's the process, but
I just want us to
that's
be
the
prepared
process.
for people in the public that would want to have, to be aware of the code of conduct in the first place, but also be aware of how they could express any concern.
I think there's also a level of like comfortability that some citizens have, that there are some citizens who might feel bullied by a council member, but and even specifically because of that experience, don't feel comfortable going to another council member privately to express those concerns. And so I think that somehow having a more efficient.
What if a citizen doesn't like something a council member wrote in the paper? Would
I
that be
guess-
considered
so,
something?
I think, Dave, that we're really talking more about not like differences in policy, but more like if a council member called a community member like the B word or something, or the N word. And I while you think that that's something that's not very, it doesn't hurt your feelings or it doesn't intimidate you or manipulate you, it is something that I've experienced, and I think especially if it was done from a council member to a citizen member, that can be really, really detrimental to somebody and how they perceive our community, our council, but our community at large. And so I think that like we need to recognize that and also respect that those people might be feeling that way.
We can take a look at some language that would more expressly outline what that path looks like.
Because in an employee setting, the protocol would be contact the supervisor and/or in this organization.
HR.
Yeah, HR. We don't have that, and so it's gonna take, it sucks. It's also gonna take some courage and bravery, and it's hard. Like, that's hard, and I think we have to spell out that mechanism. I hope by spelling out that mechanism, that will be a deterrent. You know, just like, okay, I have to hold myself accountable to this, right? So.
Go ahead.
I think I have my comments have to do outside of section 8.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we spent a lot of time in section 8.
I was gonna say, I think, nationally, locally, statewide, I mean, there isn't a 1-800 number that anybody can really call on a legislator. I think our country has, in the last 2 years, with all the different movements, has become more conscious of what's acceptable and what's not, and found the avenues to report those things, whether it's calling the newspaper or taping it on their cell phone or taking pictures. I mean, I think everyone has found a way to address it, and I think that'll continue to even be greater with these things. I mean, I don't know if we can really put everything down on paper that's going to help us with all these things. I think common sense and what's already happened in our world is going to take care excuse me, take care of that as well.
Okay. Catherine, you had some comments on other sections?
Yes, and I see we're packing up, so I just want to be respectful to colleagues' times. I can.
I have a number of outside, do we want to just wait till a different point to discuss them? Because I have a number of things on other sections, but Dave looks like he's, that stands, I can tell.
He's ready to go off and be unethical.
Maybe to see if we can pack it into 10 minutes, I mean, if you can.
I can rattle off the
just rattle
thoughts that are in
off,
my
so
head.
that way everybody is
Can hear
clear
them.
what they are.
If that's okay.
Yep.
All right, and you don't even have to worry about writing them down fast, because I can give them to you another time, if that's easier for you. So, I think there's some language suggestions from the materials that you gave to us from the American Bar Association. The comment from the Canadian Economist is, I think that's really helpful. We talked about signing this document. I wonder if we could look to what the state legislature is doing now around harassment training. I think they're doing an annual training. So I think beyond signing this every 3 years if you get elected, I do think an annual training would be helpful at our council.
Well, it would be part of the 101. I mean, this would
Right.
get built into the 101.
Just a reminder
Absolutely.
of what X, Y, and Z are.
Yep.
I also had asked our HR director to provide copies of what's already in the employee handbook around affirmative action and sexual harassment and other unlawful harassment. I would like to see those types of items in our code of conduct. If this is what we hold employees to a standard of, I think we ought to hold ourselves to non-harassment type of behavior. And Ms. Sultan has copies if folks would like to see what that looks like. This might be a moot point, but if there's any enforcement that requires 3 council members to notify a clerk, I wonder how can that be done if that's more than 2 people? Is that violating a quorum? And maybe if this comes forward without that enforcement in there, then that's a moot point.
What section is that, Catherine? 8.
Yeah, that's an enforcement side.
All right.
Okay, then there's a language around that council members should be treated how they want to be treated. Well, I think that's too big. I think that I'll just leave it there. I think that's too vague. I think we need to do a better job at setting the standards. We might look at language to help that vagueness on page 4 of the Model of Excellence Commitment. I also think that making sure that this is clear that this applies to any time you're in the conduct of your official duty. So that clarifies that's beyond a public meeting. Doesn't mean if you're out at a bar having a drink, doesn't mean if you're at a ball game just having fun. This means if you are in your official duties, acting in this capacity, then these rules apply to all of us.
That's ambiguous too.
Yeah, we might want to clarify that.
Yeah, and communication, official duties and communication.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some clarification, absolutely. I think that having a general statement in the beginning of like, what do we mean by respect? Like, for this whole document, do we mean that you can't be belligerent, abusive, and threatening to just fellow council members? Does this apply to members of the press? Does this apply to members of staff? Just to maybe have a little bit of a broader expectation, and then there can be the nuances spelled out in each category, but I think just one consistent thing there. Wrapping up on the last page here, in section 2 under A, it says that we are encouraged to use formal titles. I think it would be good to have something in there unless otherwise agreed upon. So there may be a time where we say, we just need to dial it down for our group. Calling ourselves our first names. We're not that fancy. I would support having an extended time frame longer than September and look to city manager to give us some guidance of what that would be to be helpful for him. And then also some notations around bodily gestures, that if inappropriate bodily gestures are happening during a meeting, that aside from words.
I
But
was
that's,
thinking eye rolling. I think eye rolling should be just,
well, when people are making not just threatening words, but if there's threatening gestures that are going on, that's problematic to me.
We need a council member to throw a pop can at another council member in a meeting.
Not in Eau Claire.
Yep, in Eau Claire.
Okay. Appreciate that feedback, thank you. And if you have it, send it to me, sir. I took some notes.
I just asked a question. If we had something written down that says don't throw pop cans, do you think you wouldn't have thrown that pop can?
No, but we would have probably made a deal with it at the next meeting.
or call it point of order.
Or call it point of order.
Well, I understand that, yeah, I think a point of order would have been done, it would have been handled there and then. I
Right by the
don't,
body.
But I've been in a meeting that's not a legislative session, where somebody was making very inappropriate hand gestures at a non-legislative meeting that was only for council members. I find that offensive. A point of order wouldn't have worked.
Because you didn't know about it until after the meeting.
No,
Because
because
it's
it's
a
a
citizen.
non-legislative.
There's a non-legislative and a citizen contacted me to tell me about it. So, I mean, it's a thing. That goes under being abusive and threatening. It's, abuse doesn't just happen with words. It happens in other ways, so.
Andrew, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, section C, which is usurping the power of the city manager. I don't disagree with any of those things, but this language seems like we don't have a clear, this is very clear in terms of what city council should do, but we don't have a very clear what city manager and city staff should do in terms of council's role. And so I think that if we were to go down this road, that we might want to clarify the other piece of it, which is what our roles are as a legislative body and how they ought not to be infringed on either. I mean, if we're
So
gonna.
the positive and not just the negative.
Yeah, so it's a little more, it's sort of a two-way. Because this is very strong language, but, and I don't disagree with it, but then could we do, here's your policy, here's what the policy role is of the council, and, yeah, that's just a suggestion.
Let me think about that.
Section B, there was some stuff here about 5-minute speaking terms, and I wasn't sure if some of that, if that was really needed in a code of conduct, or if that was more in the
handbook and the procedural, yeah.
I share the same sentiment.
Yeah, because that could change, and we might look at it differently, and that's, I just, yeah, not sure if it fits in here. Those are all that I had, and then the other idea of sort of that soft censure, saying, you know, someone, that was my third.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts?
I had two.
Yes.
Let's see, section 3A, treat all staff as professional. Poor behavior towards staff. What is poor behavior? Who defines what poor behavior is? And then probably on that same note under C, let's see, the third line down, employees or staff, either publicly or privately, council members shall not attempt to unethically influence or coerce city staff. What does that mean, unethically? I mean, how would you define that? So I guess those are just a couple of things that maybe are broad, maybe. And maybe they're meant to be broad, but.
All right, that's all good feedback. We are now coming right up on an hour and a half, which is admittedly self-imposed. So I think there's enough here that I guess to try to avoid a lot of amending on the floor, that there might be value in us taking another crack at it and, you know, having an opportunity to have a conversation again if you're okay with that. Because I'd like to have the final draft be as close to what maybe a majority of you will want to vote for. So
Will there be a public hearing on this?
that's your.
Is this going to be something like a resolution we're going to include in the handbook? Is that what we're looking at here?
So that's another part of the conversation that we didn't get to here, and that is, you know, would you want this to be a resolution? Would you want it to be an ordinance? I mean, there's some subtle differences to that, but I don't know in the end if they're substantive.
Well, I think the way you're heading, as long as you're not doing enforcement actions, a resolution that would put it in your handbook is sufficient. But if you want to codify, could. But you'd certainly want to adopt it by formal action of the council to be a resolution.
But whether or not you'd have a Monday night discussion on it, I guess we can still talk about that. So we have a lot of different work sessions coming up between between the budget and so. I guess what I would ask is we will take another crack at it based upon the feedback we had. And go ahead.
Sort of like post-budget, pre-public works.
Yeah, well, post-budget would be November.
I know. Basically, that would be November, December or January.
And you only have the one meeting. Hopefully, only. Unless you want to have a meeting just before Christmas, we've generally, canceled that meeting before Christmas. So,
I think you'd want to do something before, basically before the election. I mean, you need to have this in place.
Since all of you have worked on it, and we certainly want to wrap that up. So,
I wanted to have it in place for any new elected officials.
So let's look at the work schedule. I mean, if we can do something before before the end of the year. I mean, if we can fit in, with if we have to find ourselves with a gap. Otherwise, it would be maybe end of January at the latest.
Well, would you feel, I guess, or would the council feel comfortable? That seems like, January seems like a little longer.
Like a long ways off.
Yeah, I'm wondering what if you got a draft together and people could just communicate with you, yep, I'm ready to vote on it, or I really think we better come together.
We should come together.
Yeah, I think we're going to be careful about that in terms of then you're having a discussion on it, and I also want to be sensitive to making changes that I'm hearing some consensus on, that I'm not being driven too much detail by one council member versus hearing collectively from all of you. Although there's not voting happening here, I mean, you get a sense of where people are going. So let me see where that can go. Certainly that first meeting in December, I don't think there's anything scheduled on that, and so I can get it in there. I just know we have a lot of work sessions, and hopefully if we can get close, it's not going to be a full hour and a half one. That's perfect. It's exactly what we want.
Yeah.
and half an hour later, we're on our way.
I personally like to have it still in the fall yet.
Okay.
I think that's
Let me see what we can do. All right. Thank you very much. I guess I want to say not only thank you for your time, but thank you for your interest in the topic. Holding ourselves to a high level of conduct is very important to me personally. It's been a strong theme as I've worked with our employees, with our organization, with our own internal training. I have very high expectations that we treat each other with respect, that we can agree to disagree on professional levels, but we also we have to remember that we respect each other as individuals and as people, because we all have to continue to work together. And those are strong tenets within the organization, and have been driven very hard within the organization. And so the fact that you want to have some of that conversation amongst yourselves at the elected level, I appreciate the fact that you're having that conversation, and hopefully we can come up with something here that works for you. So thank you.
Thank you.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the City of Eau Claire. A transcript of this meeting is available for the hearing impaired. It will be available within 7 days of this telecast. Call 715-839-4912 or TDD 715-839-1689. Or write Eau Claire City Clerk, P.O. Box 5148, Eau Claire, Wisconsin 54702-5148. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.